Everybody, a bit of a follow up to yesterday's video that I made about how whether or not Donald Trump won his appeal. And I think I can essentially say that he basically did, but not comprehensively. As in, I mean, if he completely won it, all five judges would have said, toss the whole thing out, case dismissed, no charges to answer. Only one did. Two said retrial, and two said still find him guilty, but no penalty or much lower penalty. And I'm not aware of him being given any penalty at all now. Like they vacated the penalty that he had. I haven't heard of any new penalty being brought back in. It might be something, not aware of one. So that's, it's a pretty big win, but it's not a comprehensive win. I think it's leaning towards a pretty comprehensive win. Now, I wanted to just look at the whole stream of cases that were against Donald Trump between his first presidency and his second. So these groups have been described in various quarters as lawfare. Now, depending on which side of politics you're on, essentially, you will either view them as completely unfair as a group and lawfare, or you will view them as completely reasonable, nobody's above the law, proving that Donald Trump is a horrible person and shouldn't be allowed to hold office. Now, interestingly, and I find this very interesting, if you believe that these were legitimate, you will probably believe that he shouldn't hold office. Because most people that believe that these trials, these prosecutions were fair, also follow through with that and believe that he shouldn't have been allowed to be president, shouldn't have been allowed to run. And in fact, some parts of America, I believe California, took him off the ballot and tried to ban him from running. That was overthrown. There was a legal court thing said they're not allowed to do that. But suffice to say, one side saying, no, you only did that because you didn't want him to run for office or be allowed to run for office. And the other side said, no, we did this because it's legitimate and it proves he's not allowed to run for office. You see, both sides are kind of saying, you did this because you don't want him to run for office. But the only real difference is that one's saying, that doesn't make it not fair. That doesn't make it not legitimate. And the other side's saying, well, it actually does make it not legitimate. Or it's not legitimate. So there's no question that these were run with politics in mind. Both sides have essentially agreed that these were politically motivated. But one side says, but it was fair to do this. And the other side says it's not fair to do this. So I wanted to just look at them as a group. So we've got this one. We've now had the appeal of it. It's won the appeal. It may well be appealed again, and I don't think that it will succeed in an appeal back the other way. I don't think there's any real basis for it other than the view that the appeals court went with a minority view because it was 1-2-2. So they're allowed to run with a majority rule, particularly if it's 4 versus 1. 3 versus 2 might be appealable. This was actually 2-2-1. And they went with the 2. The problem is that the 2 that they went with was the 2 that was most favourable to the original verdict. And if they're appealing to try to get it back to the original verdict on the basis that they ran with that, it's not really going to go well for them. Because if you're saying, well, it was not fair for them to say he's guilty but with no penalty, well, the other 2 judgments were actually more favourable to Trump. So if you did a retrial, then essentially you'd be doing either that or have the whole thing thrown out. And we had 1 out of 5 had the whole thing thrown out. 2 say no penalty. I mean, guilty in theory, but no penalty. And yeah, you pretty much, it's either going to be the same or worse. Worse for Letitia James and the original prosecutors. So I don't think that that's grounds for an appeal. If they have another ground for appeal, I'm not aware of. I don't know. And in fact, I think that if they did try to appeal, that you could go the other way and say, well, actually, this is in the wrong jurisdiction. Actually, you should have recused yourself because this is politically motivated. Actually, there were no victims. Actually, this was insane and you should probably actually be facing prosecution for wrongful prosecution. But the thing is, and I want to just highlight this. This was the most legitimate of all of the lawfares against Trump. And I really want to just highlight that. This was the most legitimate. Now, the least legitimate one, in my opinion at least, is E. Jean Carroll. So the E. Jean Carroll one, and the reason why I'm saying this is the most illegitimate one, is because that was a defamation case. A lot of people aren't aware that that was a defamation case. So essentially what she said is that she made an accusation that Donald Trump had hurt her. YouTube won't allow me to say what she actually claimed that he did, but that he hurt her. So I'm sure you know what I really mean by that. And he's then said, no, I didn't hurt you. And she said, it's defamation to say that you didn't hurt me. What? What? So if someone accuses me of something and I say, no, I didn't, I can be sued for $100 million for defamation? What? No. That's not how defamation works, guys. If she writes in her book and accuses someone of doing something to hurt her, that person is allowed to sue her. That's how defamation works. She can't sue him for denying it. You're not allowed to do that. So if it is the case that she's telling the truth and she wants to punish him for it, go to criminal court. That's not what civil court's for. So there has been a massive miscarriage of justice by doing that. He's never been found guilty of that. He's never been charged. Police have not charged him. She never even complained about it until recently, fairly recently. Perhaps she did talk to a friend and suggest it 5 years after the fact, but certainly not at the time. No going to police, no criminal charges, no criminal complaints. And yet it's defamation. Are you freaking kidding me? So that is the most insane injustice. That's just so wrong, particularly what she's accusing him of. And people are now going, oh, well, he's this thing. I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. So that one is the worst one. That one is the least guilty. And in fact, in court, and it was a civil court, and they had a jury, and the jury did not actually find him guilty of that. But he still had to pay defamation money. Millions. Where's the hurt? Where's the harm to her reputation? Sorry. She got sales of a book out of it. Arguably, she shouldn't have been allowed to write. I mean, again, and I'll just say this. Defamation needs to be not only a lie, but a willful lie. And if you state it as an opinion, because it depends on how you say it, it might not be defamation. So she may well be allowed to say that. But he's also allowed to say it didn't happen. Not defamation, guys. Not defamation. Not from him. Potentially from her. I think there's a very strong argument that she committed defamation by writing that book. I can't guarantee because I haven't read exactly what she wrote and how she phrased it. But certainly, if there is defamation, it's by her, not by him. And that's even if he did do it. And I'm not saying he definitely didn't do it. I wasn't there. But she hasn't proved that he did it. Gone nowhere near proving that he did it. So at most, the most she can say is that she wasn't defaming him by saying it. But that doesn't mean he's defaming her by saying he didn't do it. People might be confused by this. Two people are allowed to say opposite things about the same thing, and neither have committed defamation. Shocking, isn't it? Particularly when you're saying something like, oh, you hit me. I didn't hit you. And I'm just going to say that because of YouTube's rules. But seriously, guys, that one is insane. And they had to change laws. Can't even get the year. Like they're within, I was within 2 or 3 years. Haven't got any specifics. And arguably, how can you have the year or specifics when it was that long ago and, even if it did happen, and again, I can't guarantee that it didn't happen because that's not what a civil court is about. It's, it's a stupid one. That one should not have been heard. Now, so I went with the most legitimate one, which is actually this one that just got appealed. The second most legitimate one is the Stormy Daniels one. And the reason why I say that one is the second most is because she actually was given hush money. So there's an evidence of fact about it. and she was given money. It was to shut up about things. Now we don't know whether they had an affair or not. Um, that would be, up for Trump and his wife. She has decided not to sue him for it, so none of our business. Hasn't been proven either way. He could pay hush money when nothing had happened, and he could pay hush money if something did happen. He could pay hush money if something small happened. That's irrelevant. That's not on trial. Um, so but you're allowed to pay someone hush money. That's not illegal. Not a lot of people think, oh, that's mafia thing. You associate that with mafia, but you are allowed to get a non-disclosure agreement. So let's say, for example, well, let's say that somebody saw me do something that I don't want them to talk about, so I've agreed to give them some money to not show it. I mean, that might be blackmail. If she demanded it, it would be blackmail, and that would be a crime by her. But if it's by mutual agreement and there's no blackmail element, it's fine. There's been no crime committed, certainly not on Trump's part. There may have been a crime committed by Stormy Daniels if she blackmailed him, or if she signed it and then blabbed about it anyway. And she certainly does seem to be blabbing about it anyway. So there could well have been a crime, but if there was a crime, it's by her, not by him. Now, and again, I'm saying this is the most legitimate one, or the second most legitimate one. The only reason that this is even being mentioned is because there is the possibility that he used campaign finances for it. Now, this is where it gets a bit funny. So he raised a certain amount of campaign finances, and he may have written something as a campaign expenditure, except that it wasn't him, it was someone else. But the other person who did it said that Trump told him to do it. And even if he did it, there is certainly an argument that this is a legitimate election element. Because you don't want these things to come out in an election, because it's going to damage your reputation. In fact, if you ask the people that contributed, then they're probably going to say, yeah, no, fair enough, you do that. And this is the thing. If you're abusing campaign finances, the victims are the people who raise the money for you. None of them have complained. So it's similar with that bank overestimating, underestimating assets things. There are no victims. Now, I've followed, there's been quite a few of these sorts of cases here in Australia, usually by low-level politicians who are going for office for the first time. They raise however much money, and then they spend it on themselves on a holiday. And then the people who raise the money are like, give me your money back. You spent it on a holiday. So that's what that kind of law is for. It's not for this kind of thing. And plus, of course, the penalty for it is usually pay it back. And it's only when you can't pay it back that something happened. So it is a technical thing. And there are people in Australia who were banned from running for office for one term because they couldn't pay it back when they spent it on themselves. But it's pretty minor. It usually isn't penalised unless you're just appallingly doing it just to raise money for yourself, to buy a holiday or a car or whatever. That's not what Trump did. Trump did it in a fairly legitimate way to pay off somebody who was trying to damage his reputation. And now again, I'll say there could well have been a crime, but there was a crime. If there was a crime, it was by Stormy Daniels, not by Donald Trump. And again, I go back to that bank one, which was slightly more legitimate than this. If there was a crime, it was probably by the bank. And we had a Royal Commission into banking practices here in Australia related to, I think they're called ninja loans, no income, no job or assets. And banks were giving massive loans to people that didn't deserve them. And they didn't penalise the people who got the loans, they penalised the banks. So the Royal Commission found the banks guilty. So why is Donald Trump guilty of getting a favourable loan? Surely, if there is a crime, it's by the bank. But nobody's penalising the bank because they wanted to go after Trump. I mean, the Royal Commission into banking industry bad practices, I can't remember the exact terms of it, none of them went after the people that got the loans. No. They were victims. So arguably in this case, Trump was the victim. And that's the most legitimate one. That's the most legitimate one. Because if you compare that with the E. Jean Carroll one, the E. Jean Carroll one was so insanely bad that that's the most illegitimate one. So in between, and it's a little bit difficult to put the others in a practical order, but we had the January 6th one, which a storming of the US Capitol building, and insurrection. Now nobody was hurt in that, or at least no. The victims, the only people that were hurt were the people that stormed the Capitol building, and they went to jail and all that kind of thing. And arguably, if Trump did encourage it, he didn't want them to be hurt. It's not like any politicians were murdered over it, or were hurt, or cut, or anything like that. Just a little bit spooked, perhaps, and had to run away. And Trump didn't tell them to do that. I mean, it's not like it was an actual insurrection. You would have had people killing like thousands of people and then going in, murdering a bunch of people. That would be an insurrection. That's not what he did. He didn't try to do that. There was only a fairly small number of people, and they went in, they broke and entered. They burgled. Still a crime. Should go to jail for burglary. But it's not an insurrection. It's not the same thing. And the other thing is, this was already proven with Twitter. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, he did an investigation. There was Matt Taibbi, whoever it was, and a few other people, and they looked through the files and went, oh, well, actually, this wasn't what it says it was. And they'd looked at other things. This was a fraudulent case against all these people. And that's the thing, is that he was impeached over it, and that impeachment, and the impeachment process is itself a corrupt process. You get impeached if you don't have the numbers in the House of Representatives. You're in a minority government. If you have the numbers, you can't be impeached no matter what you do. If you don't have the numbers, you can be impeached over anything. So he was impeached because he didn't have enough numbers in the House of Representatives. It wasn't because he did anything wrong. And we've got to realise this. It's unusual for presidents, US presidents, to get into office without having the numbers of the House of Representatives. Now he won the trial not because he was not guilty, but because you need to have a 2/3 majority in the Senate, and that's never going to happen. So they'll never win a trial, no matter how guilty they are. That was not a legal thing. It was some strange, corrupt thing that Americans do, because I don't even understand why they have impeachment, which just doesn't ever lead to anything. It's certainly not at that level. You need to have your own party betray you, at least half of them, in order for that to actually work in the Senate. And you're never going to have, well, it's always going to succeed if you don't have the numbers in the House of Representatives. So that was not a legal process. That was a stupid thing that Americans like to do, to pretend that they, I don't know why they even have impeachment. It's such a stupid process. Never proves anything either way. It didn't prove anything. Now, they did try to have a trial proper about it. Hasn't gone anywhere, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So that one's, they did sort of try to a little bit follow the rule of law, but it was really mainly about trying to stop him from holding office the second time. And in fact, this was the thing that led to all the other ones, because even though they had the impeachment for that after he left office, they failed to win the trial, which meant that he could hold office again, and he did hold office, and so then they tried to have other things to stop him from holding office. So this one's probably on the not legitimate side, the January 6th thing. Now then you had the, what was the one with the documents? That was not very legitimate, because he was allowed to hold the documents. But I suppose then they said, well, they weren't very secure, and they asked for them back, and he didn't give them back. And in comparison, Biden was asked to bring them back, and he said, oh, whoops, sorry, I've had them there for 70 years. I'll give them back. They were in my garage. Ha ha. And Biden didn't get into trouble. They didn't have them as secure as Trump, but then some people say, oh, but they were in toilets. Well, I don't know. And then, in the garage versus at Mar-a-Lago, in a secure place with Secret Service. And of course, Trump was allowed to have them. Other presidents have had, documents like that. It's not like he was giving them to friends and foreign diplomats and all that sort of stuff. He wasn't. But there was a bit about, he was asked to give them back and he didn't. So that one's probably on the more legitimate side. So I'm probably going to put that one, so not as legitimate as the Stormy Daniels one. But on the slightly more legitimate side, yeah. So it probably goes from least legitimate to most. The least legitimate was the E. Jean Carroll one. Um, then you probably had the storming the Capitol one, and then yeah, then you'd have the documents, the confidential documents one. Um, I've forgotten one. Then Stormy Daniels, and then yeah, the most legitimate one was the recent one, the one with the banks with overstating and understating assets. Now, I just want to look at these as a whole, and I may have forgotten a few because I'm just sort of reciting these from memory, but I want to look at these as a whole. If the most legitimate one is one that's only technically legitimate, and none of them rise above that, can we say that these were legitimate? And I don't think we can. I don't think we can say, oh, it was a technicality that, he technically did overstate assets and he did understate assets and he did get a more favourable loan. I don't think we can say that that was justified. Because if anyone's to blame for that, it was actually the bank, not him. And New York was the wrong state to be doing it. There was no complaints about it by the bank or anyone else. There was no victims, and the amount was an insane amount. And I think we need to talk about how it went from 350 million up to 550 million in 2 years of interest. That's more than half again. So that's suggesting that we have an interest rate of 30% per year. Do we have an interest rate of 30% per year? No. It's like 3. So why are they adding that much extra? I don't know the answer to that. I just want to query. How can they possibly justify adding that much extra in such a short period of time? I don't think they can. And that really just, like, nobody's talking about that, but I just go, where did this come from? Where did these numbers come from? I put my money in a high interest yielding account and I get 6%. They're having just an interest on a fine and they're getting 30%. Well, where's this coming from? Nobody's even complaining about it. They're just saying, oh, we'll just add. The courts are just ripping people off. I mean, if I had a loan or a fine, it's a fine, that goes up that much while it's on appeal, it should be frozen while it's on appeal. Sorry, guys. There's just a massive corruption there. And we're going to say that whole process was corrupt. But that's the most legitimate one. The E. Jean Carroll one, I think there's a very strong case that she committed defamation. Now, I can't guarantee that she did because it hasn't been tested, but I think there's a very strong case to say that she committed defamation. She might not have, because it might have been opinion, all that sort of stuff. Him denying it, he is allowed to deny something he's been accused of that he hasn't been found guilty of. And he still hasn't been found guilty of it, because that is not what the trial was about. So that trial was about as corrupt as they come. The wrong verdict was given, should have been thrown out, shouldn't have been allowed to be heard. There were so many levels of wrongness about it. And yeah, that's just insane. So I'm sorry, E. Jean Carroll fans who think that was legitimate. It was not. And that's not to say that there's no chance that he did this thing. I wasn't there. There's no security footage. There's no witnesses. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. But what it does mean is that she can't sue him for defamation for it. She just simply can't. The rule of law has not been applied even slightly. Now, if she did be assaulted, well, I feel very sorry for her. She should go to police. That is the correct process for things like that. You don't just write in a book. You go to police. Now, okay, there's certain circumstances where you're afraid to go to police, you don't want to go to police. But usually if you're afraid to go to police, you don't just put in a book. It's not normally how you do it. Maybe there's some reason for that. Okay, fine. She wants to put it in a book. And maybe it's not defamation because maybe she honestly believes it, or she's not completely lying, or satire, or whatever. I'm not guaranteeing it's defamation, but I'm going to say, from what I know of the case, he should have sued her for defamation, and he should have won. And he should have won the sort of amount that she won from him. Now, there are a lot of reasons not to sue for defamation. I've gone over that in a number of other videos, a number of other analysis. For example, there's people who've sued for defamation, have failed to prove it, and then have been falsely accused of whatever they were defamed about. Not because it happened, but because they failed to prove that it was defamation. And that would be a reason for Trump not to do it, because he may have difficulty proving it was defamation. And in fact, I'd say most of the time it's a bad idea to sue for defamation. But that doesn't mean it wasn't defamation, that it was true. I don't think anybody other than her and him could honestly say if we know that that happened or not. I don't think we can say. There's been no evidence presented that it happened. And there's also been no evidence presented that it didn't happen. So the chances of it happening, I don't know. I don't know what the chances are. But this was not a criminal trial. This was a civil trial for defamation. And that's the wrong court. It's the wrong jurisdiction. It's the wrong way to do it. And the people who allowed that, I mean, they had to change the law to allow it. They had to change the law to find him guilty. They had to change the law. It really is not a legal way to do it. Not a fair way for a country to do it. Where one and only one person in the country can be found guilty of that in that way. That's not anything close to a fair system. And if you think that that was a fair system, well, you're just simply wrong. You're just simply wrong. If you think that E. Jean Carroll was defamed, you're just wrong. She wasn't. Now, you can think that she's allowed to say it and she wasn't defaming him. Maybe that's true. And you can even think, hypothetically, that he did do what she accused him of doing. That doesn't make it defamation. There's a lot more that needs to be done before you think that. And just because you think that's possible that happened, still doesn't mean that he defamed her. There's no way that he defamed her. Just simply no way. So there's a lot of people that are saying that he did and they're accusing him of that thing. A lot of these people are just simply wrong. And I'm going to say that definitively. And, I'm being careful with my words. But, like I can say, I think that Trump did overstate his assets, and I think he did. And I think he understated some assets, and I think he did. And I think he did pay hush money to Stormy Daniels, and I think he did. And I think that, well, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say I reckon most likely he did have romantic things with Stormy Daniels. I think that's not defamation. None of those things I just said are defamation. And if you said, I think that Trump did that with E. Jean Carroll, fine, you're allowed to say that. You think it didn't happen? You're allowed to say that too. It's not defamation, guys. That was really wrong. And it just makes me angry to think that they changed the laws to allow that. Now, that's not to say there are not parts of the world where you're not allowed to say things like that. There definitely are. There are definitely parts of the world where you're not allowed to say anything like that about certain people. But while America says that they're a fair place, they can't go around having rulings like that. So I really do hope that the E. Jean Carroll case is overturned, thrown out, dismissed. And I think there's a lot of grounds for that. There's a ridiculous number of grounds for that to be removed, revoked. In fact, I would say, and again I'd say, I can't guarantee that she defamed him, but I think there is a very strong case that she defamed him by saying that. I haven't tested it properly. Nobody's tested it. I say there's a stronger case that she defamed him than there is that he defamed her. I don't know that it's quite enough for her to be found guilty of defamation, but it would be very close to enough. And yeah, but regardless of whether she committed defamation, definitely he didn't. There's no way whatsoever that is even possible. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Have a nice day, everybody. Let me know any thoughts you have in the comments. If you agree, disagree, whatever you want to think. Bye bye now.